Ready to go? You ready to go? Yeah. Recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Cohen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Reagan, I'd like to ask you a few questions. FAA currently has a 90-second evacuation standard for commercial aircraft, but that standard is based on an unrealistic studies, terribly unrealistic. The EVAC Act, which was included in the reauthorization bill, requires a new study to consider passengers with disabilities, airplanes with young and old passengers as well, animals on the plane, carry-on baggage, and other factors of realistic flights when evaluating how seat size and configuration could impact evacuations. How important, Mr. Reagan, is it important that the FAA implement this provision as soon as possible? And what are the consequences for your members if the FAA does not get this right?
Thank you for the question. I think it's critical that they implement this requirement. I mean, you're talking about, in many cases, aircraft that have been redesigned. You've had different seating arrangements. And we're talking about the process and the requirements when there is a crisis. And if there is a crisis where you have to evacuate the aircraft, the entire flight crew, on the pilots, the flight attendants, the people on the ground, first responders who are going to be responding, need to have accurate information for how to evacuate an aircraft safely and efficiently, and try to avert the worst consequences when there is a disaster. So I think this is a really important update to our regulations that should be implemented right away.
Thank you, sir. After public outrage over the treatment of passengers with disabilities and their mobility aids, such as wheelchairs, I introduced legislation to require the Department of Transportation to evaluate complaints by passengers with disabilities. This was included in the FAA reauthorization law. Mr. Reagan, how much training do your airport service workers receive on how to appropriately assist passengers with disabilities, including both helping them on and off the aircraft and around the airport, as well as how to handle mobility aids? And what additional tools and guidance are needed from the Department of Transportation to ensure your members can meet the new requirements for handling passengers with disabilities?
Well, I think one of the things that's often overlooked about those workers who play that critical role at airports and in terms of boarding and deplaning, most of them are not employed directly by the airlines themselves. Most of them are out of subcontractors that are employing all of those important parts of the job. And in most cases, these are the lowest paid people in the entire industry. And that's something that the GAO study that was included in the bill is hoping to start to address, to bring up standards across the board, because when you have a hodgepodge of different contractors providing it, the safety training standards that you're referring to are oftentimes different depending on who the actual employer is and what their standards are. So I do think, raising the standard of living for the workers who are doing those jobs, but also having standardization across the industry for what training priorities are necessary and how they can do this job most effectively to comply with federal disability laws is a really important priority for this committee.
Thank you, sir. I also had a provision that requires commercial aircraft on long over-water routes to have black box technology that allows investigators to recover the flight data and cockpit voice recordings without searching the floor. Can you discuss the importance of having modern accident investigation technologies that do not require underwater retrieval of the black boxes?
Yes, I mean, again, we're talking about the unfortunate scenarios when something awful happens. And I assure you, if my friend Jennifer Hamady, the chair of the NTSB, were here, she would have extremely extensive knowledge about what difficulties they face in terms of properly identifying what caused an accident. And certainly access to the best data is really important for that process.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bunch, the FAA reauthorization bill included numerous provisions to strengthen the aviation workforce, including maximum hiring of air traffic controllers, review of staffing requirements for aviation safety inspectors, and workforce development programs for pilots, aviation maintenance, and aviation manufacturing. Have your members seen any progress on those provisions in the FAA reauthorization bill?
Yes, Mr. Cohen, as we have watched the very positive pressure that this committee has put on the FAA, they really embrace the fact that they need to get their workforce out to our plants to do what we call knowledge sharing. And we don't call it training. We have an ability to go and get our technicians to sit together with the FAA technicians and teach them about the newest methodology and the technology that we incorporate into the industry. And it really does help them. As I mentioned earlier, these young people are coming straight out of college, and you know, the antiquated way that we do a lot of the things with the FAA now, we still use paper. You know, and these kids are very used to operating and manipulating 3D drawings with a computer rotating around and everything. And so this knowledge sharing also helps drive a change in the attitude in the FAA to embrace the new technology and the digitization that you all put into the bill to be able to go and let these young people use the skills that they've learned in college to properly regulate. And so I really think what you've done in the workforce is put a light on what we need to do. And as I mentioned earlier, now getting these high school kids to have an opportunity to get excited about aerospace and all the opportunities there, these grants to be able to help high schools, but also our tech schools be able to prepare our manufacturing workforce is the next element that we hope the appropriators will fund.
Thank you. Before I yield back the time that I don't have, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a Transportation Workers Union of America paper on what their needs are with the FAA Reauthorization Act.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield back that time.